Hello. What's up, friends? It's time to play Dear Esther again. It's the Chinese room. So. Oh dear. Bad hair day. Second playthrough. Halfway through. Third stream. Although this game is really only long enough for half of one stream. But hey, I'm appreciating it. And this stream is my director's commentary stream, which I'm appreciating even more, or rather it's allowing me to appreciate the game even more. So yeah, let's continue with that. Halfway through, I believe exactly halfway through, in fact. We're just going to the caves. Just plummeted down. And yeah, I'm intrigued to see what these guys have to say about the caves. I'm sure they have a lot to say. It's probably the most beautiful part of the game. So yeah. Yep. About 5 paces to the first bit of commentary. Let's do it. Exactly 5
paces. The caves in the game are really interesting because it's a very tonal shift within the whole visual look of the game. It's kind of like this more organic, more surreal, dreamlike landscape compared to what you're used to before this point. It's we kind of used the visuals and this kind of unreal theme very subtly, but here it's kind of at the forefront, and it's, to me, has kind of been designed as this kind of journey through the inner self, through the body, and it's really designed to be a very different experience compared to the rest of the game. Yeah, I think they nailed it again. Never actually noticed the dripping before. Oh, this soundtrack. I like a lot of things about this game. I like how bleak it is. I like that it was supposedly the first walking sim. I like the story, although it's a little maybe too out there for me at times, like I said previously. But the soundtrack. That's got to be the one, hasn't it?
This, for me, is probably the most pivotal music cue in the game, and it's the one that most people write to me about to say that they are absolutely obsessed with and they love. It's the only music cue that has singing. It has a female voice, and I think that's a really important shift for me, that you've gone from this beautiful string music, but it's quite abstract, into what is effectively a song. And with lyrics, so you're actually explicitly saying something as a composer at this point. The other thing that I think it's important to say for me is it's the biggest shift from the music that I wrote for the mod. It's the same music, but the act of having it sung by an amazing singer. I sang it on the original and it's really bad, and Clara Sanabras re-recorded it. And it's what good actors do, it's what Nigel Carrington did, it's what good musicians do, and they take something that you've created and they just shove it up into the next level and make something that's good into something really extraordinary. And also for me, I think it's a point where the environment art and the music just meld so beautifully and so
100%.
seamlessly into one. I mean, on a personal level, I've played the game hundreds of times now.
Hundreds?
And I still enter the caves and I look at Rob's work and I'm just absolutely overawed, just gobsmacked by its beauty. And I just think it's a really magical moment in gaming for me, actually. I know that probably sounds really dramatic, but I just think it absolutely hits something where everything just works together. And the music is so dreamlike. You know, Rob has talked about
It is great.
the journey through the body, and I think that's absolutely, for me, the music becomes so organic and fluid and actually very feminine and female at that point. You're hearing the voice of his love.
Okay, the voice of his love. Wow. Yeah, I guess I hadn't considered that. But it makes complete sense and works so well. Yeah. Do you know, this is making me like the game a lot more. A lot more. Picking apart the soundtrack alone is worth doing this director's commentary.
I just want to say that I think you can divide caves in games into pre and post Dear Esther. I think that it's just a way of breaking away from reality into saying what you can do with these spaces that actually makes them this incredibly, much more vividly colourful and much more kind of interpretative and look from it. And it's really interesting that I look at caves now in games and I find myself going, that's a very Rob Briscoe cave. And I think that's an amazing thing to have achieved. So I think it's one of those, it's great paying other people's work compliments. I enjoy that because you never feel like you're being big-headed about yourself, but I think it is, I think particularly it does come again down to that blend between the audio and visuals that just, it's a real high watermark. I kind of, it's one of the areas in all of the games we've made that I'm most proud of.
I think as well, you think you know what you're getting with Dear
Yes.
Esther for the first 45 minutes of the game, wherever we are at this point, and then you step into something completely unexpected and completely new, and I think it just throws the player such a curveball in such a wonderful way.
If ever you wondered whether computer games were an art form, just listen to these people talk about how passionate they are about the artistry that has gone into making this. They didn't just slam it together, it wasn't just put together for a bit of cheap fun. It was a passion project from several different minds. Well, less than several actually. Something they wanted to last and be admired and deliberated and thought over. Which is exactly what it's become.
I think when you're designing a game, it's very easy to get very locked into what the system can do. And you're trying to deal with all the different variations of things that if a player does this, then this. And we have to deal with the consequence here. And our lead designer, Andrew, and I talk about this all the time, about you might have an idea, but then how does this radiate out throughout the entire system? And you get very caught in the idea of what the system has to be and how robust the system has to be and this kind of thing. And I think what's really important as a sort of a designer or as a creative is that understanding that actually the real game is happening in the player's head, and that the system can be whatever you want it to be, but if the game isn't running in the player's head as opposed to on the screen, then you're missing a trick. You're not letting the game be everything it could be. And I think the great thing about working with a game as simple as Esther in a way is that those sort of consequences of player interaction, there's not a huge number of them in the way that there might be with a very mechanically complex game. So you can really heavily focus on what is the game experience that's being played out within the player's sort of mind and heart at the moment. And there are other, sort of, I know this is a kind of a way of approaching game design that has become increasingly popular over the last few years, and like Journey was a really, really good example of that game company really focusing on what's the emotional experience of playing this game. But I think, again, it's probably one of the reasons why Esther has lasted as long as it has done, because it's not a mechanical exercise, it's an exercise in trying to inspire you as a player to have the deepest experience and the deepest engagement, and to really run the game in your own head rather than being something that you're sitting 6 feet away from kind of interacting with. I hate interaction as a term for that. I think it becomes very cold and mechanical and systems driven. And really interaction is completely trivial and pointless if there isn't an emotional engagement with the player and you haven't moved it away from the screen and into the player's head.
I think that's a very clever guy talking there. I struggle with a lot of conceptual speak, but he doesn't seem to.
What's really important to me is that Dear Esther started out as a Half-Life 2 mod, and if the Half-Life 2 modding community hadn't championed it and celebrated it and downloaded it a lot and talked about it and loved it, then it would never have been a game. So it's never really bothered me, the kind of is it a game conversation, because as far as I can see it, Dear Esther and like everything that's come after it has been inspired by it. This was championed by Half-Life 2 modders, and they made it what it is. And so if you've made something that the real kind of hardcore of the hardcore in terms of these are first-person shooter modders have gone, this is really good and really special and we're behind this, then you've already got the support of a really amazing gaming community, and the fact that they championed it, we owe them a huge amount in terms of where we are. And I'm really proud to come out of that scene. I'm really proud to be a company and to be sitting here talking about a game that started life as a mod.
Yeah, I think they're the ones that have really kind of like pushed us forward and given us the passion to be able to take it to a commercial level and give us the confidence to make us believe that there's an audience for this kind of thing.
Crowd. Power. People power. It's funny how these things come about sometimes, isn't it?
Dear Esther was my first foray into writing music for games, and I actually approached it very traditionally, so more as a film score than a traditional interactive game music score. And what's really interesting for me is that the lack of interactivity in the music was never a problem for anybody that played the game. And that's a separate discussion, but there's a big schism between game music composers of how much the music should be following the player at all times in terms of interactive music. But one of the reasons I wanted to say something at this point was that this was my little first journey into thinking about how you write music for games rather than films. So I had this song that was a certain length, and Dan said, well, we don't know how long the player is going to take to traverse through that space. And I thought, oh no, he's right, and slightly panicked. So this was a very simple solution where the song was split in half, and then I wrote some drone music that could just play for as long as was needed as the player walks through the space, and then the second half of the song would seamlessly play. And it's very, very simple, but it's quite emblematic for me in terms of my career, because it was the first time that I had to think about the player. Because with film music, it's so simple. You know exactly what's going to happen when. But this concept of interactivity was so new for me. So I kind of look back at it fondly because it's quite a basic approach to, compared to something like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, where that was an open world adventure where I had to really think about the player and their movement through the space. So I kind of look on this very fondly, this moment in the game.
I wasn't wondering how they kind of dealt with situations like that, per se, but it's really interesting to hear how. And you could hear this lady was singing at the start of the caves, then they have the droning background music, and so when you hit this bridge, that she starts up again. Very clever. Something about this reminds me of like Nordic, I'm thinking Vikings TV show. Very atmospheric.
I don't know when the paper origami boats first came into things with Esther, really, but it felt like a really amazing metaphor of taking these letters and folding them into boats
There's
and then
some
letting
here.
them leave the island, because
I
you
missed them if so.
you know at this point in the game is kind of the realisation is there that this isn't going to end well, and that the narrator is never leaving the island, and the idea that this kind of, again, the idea of communication, or the attempt or failing communication, or trying to speak through the coma, or whatever it is, however you want to interpret it. But the idea of putting the boat in the underground river really felt like it kind of reinforced that sort of dreamlike kind of quality of the caves, of actually there's something really sad about this one boat, because when you see it go past, you know that
completely
even the
missed
boats aren't
that.
going to leave the island. Like, this is something which doesn't have a tidy, neat kind of like resolution. And there's, even if you don't sort of think about it to that sort of level of depth, there's just something. It's one of those things that I really love about games that you can do, where it's just a moment that has a really distinct emotional tone to it, that you go, there's a pause when you see that boat goes past, that I just think is, yeah, it's something special you can do with kind of media like games.
Shame on me. I completely missed it both times. I wondered why the music came, the singing came back at that point, why that was so poignant. I thought, it's a bridge, it's interesting. Kind of looks man-made. It's another sort of open or inspiring environment. So that is why it kicks in. See, again, if I hadn't watched this, if I hadn't played through this commentary, I wouldn't have known. Not that I would have died unhappy because of it or anything, but it's just enhanced the experience even more.
In a lot of ways, the caves were the hardest area of the game to actually write, because we knew we didn't want to have much voiceover in there. I think because of the strength of the music, and this goes right back to the original mod, we wanted that to be the voice and for it to be a chance for Esther to speak rather than the narrator. And we also wanted to have this break, so when the narrator came out from the caves, you had a real definite sense of something happening, and that he had changed as a result of this journey. So it meant it really felt wrong to have a lot of voiceover within there, but then that made it really difficult, because then you had like 4 one-sentence lines in there, and each one of those had to have an absolute clarity and to really, really kind of work. So I think for me, it was really interesting. It's like the difference between writing kind of fiction and writing poetry. When you read really amazing poets and you have that incredible surgical precision where every single word is considered and placed so absolutely, and rather than being able to kind of, because the narrator rambles quite naturally, you could kind of get into the flow of the narrator's ramble in other places in the level, and this was a real challenge, because suddenly I was having to write like a poet, of going, every single one of these words, every single cadence, every single sound has to be absolutely perfect, or it'll just feel like the narrator's voice is intruding on the rest of the experience. So it was, I think definitely the most challenging area of the game as a writer.
It's amazing how much thought goes into this already, isn't it?
The sound here is a classic case of, again, what music I think does really well, which is you've had this soft, lyrical, beautiful, epic, dreamlike music, and then the moment you come out of the caves, you're into this really harsh soundscape, and the tonal shift is very, very brutal, I think, and deliberately so. You have very little music when you come out of the caves. You hear the wind, and it's a classic case of foreshadowing. So we know from this point that things are probably going to get bleaker, more difficult. And it's something that music does really well, I think, which is that emotional signalling and signposting.
Let's experience it.
This whole area moved, didn't it? The original mod, this was a
Yeah.
cave right at the beginning of the caves where everything was written, and it moved to the back end of the level, and we had this long corridor that's full of these kind of it's the point of high madness, I think, in the game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of just where you feel like you're losing the plot completely, both like visually and auditory, and it's kind of like this really frenetic moment for me.
I think it's where you feel most that you're underneath a mountain, and you feel the weight of that mountain, and just I loved the idea when we were, putting through it of what would it actually take to do this, like to actually paint all these symbols and what is going on. And it's quite an explicit kind of thing of madness of going, you would have to be insane or very, very disturbed to actually do this, and what is the process that this person's trying to work through, what they trying to achieve by this. And I think it really strengthened it, making it a crawl through a tunnel as opposed to just a static location.
Yeah, I think it's the consistency and the coherence of the symbols is a lot more broken down as well. Like, you see some symbols before like scattered around the environments, but at this point they're like right in your face, and they're kind of it's just total madness, Any kind of meanings have been crossed over and confused, and I think it really helps to bring the tension up at this point at a level as well. So you're kind of coming out of this dreamlike state a little bit.
Yeah, you kind of know that you're getting towards the end of the serenity into something that's a bit more disturbed than that.
Yeah. There's a hidden little comment under the water. I'm glad I stopped. I think seeing all of those crazy scribblings on the wall is probably the first time that I thought that perhaps this isn't a real island. I know there's plenty of other markers, but most of them seem plausible. Whereas somebody's going to have come down that far into the mountain with their luminous paint and spent that long doing those crazy symbols and whatnot. I mean, for me, that seems the least likely. It's almost as though that is reflecting the inside of a brain.
This is a bit more of a contentious one because we disagree on this one. I struggle with this. With the points in the caves where you duck above and below the water, and you have to have that transition of audio. And I love the audio on both sides of the surface tension of the water, but I really struggle with you breaking water because it's such a hard edge to the sound. And I don't think there's any other way around that. And you need to have those moments where you do go underwater because it's so important. But it's one of the areas that's never sat very comfortably with me, because I feel like in a level which hasn't got a single edge in it, it's the one edge within it, and it breaks me.
And that's why I think it's so successful, because you've been lured into this completely hallucinatory, dreamlike world, and then all of a sudden, as a player, you're literally gasping for breath. You're coming up for air. And I think when we're talking about that metaphor of the body, for me, it's so about birth, and it's about this coming through the water, and actually it's a moment of realisation for me, but you're having to go back under again, and you're diving down. So for me, without wanting to sound incredibly pretentious, it's about the fight between the conscious and the subconscious, and that struggle. Booyah!
There's actually a really interesting thing about that underwater section there, though, is that, I don't know if you remember, but you had a certain piece of music that plays when you're underwater, and to me, I really like that. It's kind of like, because at this point it's kind of like a very calm, relaxed type of a journey, and you go underwater and it starts to break apart a little bit, and it's almost like, that kind of psychosis is still there. It's not complete bliss at this point, and and it helps to build the atmosphere up to this final jump.
So we're both saying that Dan's wrong?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's good. That's the way it should be.
To be honest, I was agreeing with Dan until they just explained that, because I didn't want it to be jarring. I quite enjoyed the calmness of it and the dreamlike quality, and I get the breaking water as it's almost like you're diving in or leaping out of it, but I kind of see where they were coming from now. Down we go. Oh yes, forgot about this place. The weird place.
The motorway scene. The biggest new addition to between the mod and the commercial version. This didn't exist in the mod at all. It was a completely new thing.
This wasn't here the last
Yeah, it's,
time
well,
I did this.
I wasn't sure where the idea spawned from to have this scene, whether I just sort of went off or we discussed it, or I can't remember, you know.
I can't remember. Can you remember? It just kind of
No.
appeared, didn't it? And then
Yeah, it was just this kind of... I think for me, actually, I remember being some technical difficulty between the drop and then coming out at the end part. But it was like... It was the same thing that we dealt with in the past of, like, how do we not kill the player? From a technical standpoint, I think it might have been something to do that. But it was also, you know, I can't remember where the whole thing came from.
I think it's my favourite point in the whole game, actually. I think it's just it's quite shocking, and it's so surreal, and it's so beautiful. And from an audio point of view, you have that baby's heartbeat bringing us back to the idea of the ultrasound. Was Esther pregnant? And it's one of those moments that I think everything just kind of collates together, and it's so unexpected.
Didn't even
For me,
recognise
it's like
the
a moment of
heartbeat.
realization.
Yes.
It's
I hear it
like
now.
it is, you know, it's coming to terms with something almost, you know.
whether or not what actually is going on at the moment is real, this did happen. There's kind of an absolute. I remember playtesting it, and I didn't know that the car can get switched out with a hospital gurney. And I must
Yeah,
have
I
played
saw
it.
the
was like
car
3 or 4
last time I
times into
played.
playtesting it, and the first time it switched out and it was a gurney instead. And I really remember kind of sitting there and going, "Oh God, that's just," and really being just stopped in my tracks by it. And it's one of those weird things you get when you're making a game that you know you'll never have those moments that a player does, where you know it all so well. It's really, really rare to be in a situation where you actually get a genuine, fresh player's eye view on what you're making.
Yeah, I was always a bit worried that it was maybe a bit too literal. Like we gone a bit too literal with that. But I think looking back at it now, there's still a lot of strangeness going on there. Obviously, the whole scene is unusual, but there's still these like very subtle details that are there that kind of still making you think, what does that mean? Like I think if you look closely, there's like coins scattered around and things like that.
There's coins on the
For me,
gurney.
it's, again, sorry to keep going on about it, but it's about layers of subconscious for me. That you start overground, you go into the caves, you go deeper, you're falling down, it's going down the rabbit hole effectively, and then you go to the deepest level, and that's actually the truth, that's the reality, that's what happened.
Yeah, crazy. I didn't know they swapped this bit out. When I played before, it was like the scene of the car crash. And now just the gurney, and it is very literal, but I think that this part needs to be. Which is ironic, because it's the most dreamlike... We're underwater, right? Most dreamlike scene, almost.
So the admission really is that I did play fast and loose with the geography of the M5. There isn't actually a welcome break service. It's just outside the junction of Sanford. But
As
we
has
also
been
know,
pointed
as
out
has
to
been pointed
you.
out, players. I mean, what a thing if you make something that's based vaguely on somewhere in real life. In terms of a compliment, when you're getting emails from players going, there isn't a welcome break there, and people really trying to work out where is this, and whole threads about where on the M5 it is. That's just the most amazing feeling. But I think what I really love what I think works really, really well in Esther, and again, it's something that I think is really carried forward to our other games, is that a lot of the time we're not dealing with kind of like big, glamorous, amazing, epic places. It's a sort of like a ratty little island in the Hebrides. It's someone who lived in Wolverhampton. It's just outside, a service station on a stretch of the M5. And I think that earths what's going on. Gives it a realness as well, particularly when you sort of put it against the surrealness of the caves. Actually, kind of going, this is really surreal and this is really, really dreamlike. But actually, I'm talking about, a car accident just outside a little chef, and that playing off those two things against each other.
It's like making the ordinary extraordinary.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. It does make it more real. Given that it's so small time almost. We're definitely going to have some comment on the soundtrack here. This is probably the most positive moment in the game, so far as the audio is concerned.
This scene for me is like really really iconic because it kind of brings this idea of the caves being an inward journey through the body together. It's really kind of like a symbol of rebirth, and it actually brings together a lot of the visual goals that I wanted to achieve with a lot of the symbolism in the game. Like I've talked a little bit about how the environment was kind of designed to provoke emotions, and kind of the impressionistic style gives you just enough information to make you think of things and feel things. But this is probably like the antithesis of this, and the whole feeling of rebirth here is quite strong. I know Jess.
Yeah, the music's really supporting that.
Yeah,
because she sings always, always throughout. You know, we've got always, always, and then she sings never, and a moment of absolute soaring. It's the climax of the music.
As you come out of the water and the music kind of swells, and you just kind of, it is like a moment of change has happened in some way. And
it's rebirth, isn't it? For me, it's his moment of clarity and acceptance and understanding of the reality of what's happened.
And you're literally moving towards the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
You're actually doing that as you go through.
But the music especially, I think before the music got layered in, that scene was nowhere near as kind of powerful for me. Like
the music
kind of
makes
just
it.
Totally made it.
It's amazing how powerful soundtracks can be, isn't it? Especially with moving image, as in movies especially, but also TV series and games, of course. Final scene then, I think. Final quarter. And from memory, things just kind of get bleak again. I think he's made up his mind by this point.
Dan and I had worked on lots of projects together, non-game projects, before we made Dear Esther. And I think the thing that links all of the projects that we've worked on together is the idea of hidden stories and layers of stories. And one of the things I wanted to do with the music was to embed hidden little hints and stories into it. So the music that you hear here has Morse code, and the Morse code is spelling out the word Esther. And I really, really liked this concept of that some people would understand that it was Morse code and try and figure out what it was saying. It also provided a really interesting rhythmical dynamic. And yeah, it's just about these ideas of hidden stories and layers, but it also starts to emphasise the obsessional nature, I think, of the story in Dear Esther, and his agitation and actually slight panic. So you're getting this rhythm that just repeats and repeats and repeats obsessively. So I think even if you don't understand that it's saying Esther, and even if you don't understand that it's Morse code, you're still getting this feeling of this obsessional repetition and slight panic that he has. And again, it's kind of it's the new chapter, and it's spelling out that something has changed at this point.
It's like a heartbeat speeding up. That's clever. I bet the people that rated this 3.74 or whatever the heck it got on the store either didn't listen to this or didn't appreciate this commentary.
It's probably the level which has changed most from the original mod. I think it's much bigger than the final level in the mod. And one of the major changes in there is in the original mod, the whole side of the cliff face was covered in painting and writing, and a lot of that moved inside to that corridor in the caves where it's really obsessionally painted on. And it was really, we spent so long on that because we were trying to get it looking right, because it's one of those really interesting examples where I loved the image and the idea that you've got this guy painting the entire side of a mountain with words and symbols and things. But it was really interesting when it went into the rebuild, it just never worked. And I think it was because the environment was so crude in the mod that those symbols and that painting became the focus of the level, And it changed the feeling of the level completely, when actually that just wasn't something we could realise in any way, that not even technically, but just didn't artistically look and feel right. And I think probably sort of retrospectively looking back on it, that's about the sort of the sophistication and the subtlety that then came into the art, rather than just being, this is literally just a canvas that we write words on, to actually the environment telling its own story without the story being literally painted on it.
Yeah, it was very difficult when we were experimenting with that to kind of like make it not completely unreal. Like, I think for me it was kind of, I wanted to kind of bring the player a little bit back into reality after
This
the caves.
very much sounds like Morse
And
code.
I think with having those symbols everywhere, it was kind of pushing them out a little bit.
I agree.
So I think
Much
what
more
we came
impactful
to,
in the
the
cave
kind of
only.
compromise we had, it was kind of a nice in between.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a compromise to me. It felt
really?
like, no,
Cool.
it felt like it didn't
Good.
work, but it kind of, but those symbols were coded. Like there's the hill in the background when you're standing right at the end of the boat and you look back, and you suddenly realise that the shape of the mountain is the shape of a woman lying on her side asleep. And that, I remember seeing it for the first time around and going, it's saying the same things, but it's saying it in a much, much, much subtler way than
I don't remember that.
in the initial layer. But it was definitely challenging, going back to how do you have a deep, complicated, subtle art style, but still manage to have something which is very sort of stark and symbolic laid over the top. It was much more challenging.
I have to keep an eye out for that, or they'll probably mention it when we get there. There's so much I missed. I need to start paying more attention.
I think one of the most fascinating things for me about planning this director's commentary has been that in previous years, when all the three of us have talked about Dear Esther, we've talked about the interpretation of the player, but actually going through this together, post having made it, we're still surprising each other.
Yeah,
And I think that's really, really interesting for me, because it shows that we left interpretation for each other and that we trusted each other actually just to get on with it. And because we each brought our own special and unique contribution to the game, we didn't have to, in a way, talk it to death or say you have to justify every idea you have or talk it to death or explain it. That Rob's idea that the island is very tainted and corrupt, and my idea that Dan didn't know that the whole level of the caves is a birth metaphor. I think it's really amazing that we're still finding out things about the game that we didn't know.
I think it was nice when I came onto it, because Dan was basically like, he gave me a bunch of materials, but he left me to my own devices for a lot of it, and we kind of like, I'd finish the level and Dan would play it and give me some feedback, but he was very kind of like hands off at the beginning, which was really nice, kind of. So a lot of my interpretations just came through that downtime where I was just kind of like going off and doing my own thing. And so yeah, it's like interesting to hear Dan talk about it sometimes, because there's some backstory that I've never even considered before. And obviously hearing Jess talk about it as well is really interesting, especially when it comes to the soundtrack. It makes me look at things in a very different way. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I think for me, like making games is so inherently collaborative, and you have people coming together with different ideas and different takes on things. And in a way, the least interesting thing you can do with that is to structure it all so heavily that there's no space for each individual person to bring what they're thinking to it. And I think the best games, well, for me, my favourite games are ones where you can really feel the personal footprint of each individual developer and aspects of it, and it feels like it has been a genuinely collaborative exercise where everybody has thrown ideas into the mix and everybody is bringing something to the table, rather than people are just following a kind of a really structured plan. So yeah, I think it probably is one of the reasons why Esther has had the sort of life it's had since release, is because there's 4 people if you include Nigel, all bringing very different things to it, and it gives it a huge amount of depth for something that's so simple on the surface.
Yeah, that really worked. I wonder if it would work for a game that was a little more, I say linear. I mean, you can't get much more linear than a walking sim, but linear in its concept and its themes. I think it works so well for this because it's supposed to be a bit muddled up and ambiguous. And what a perfect way to create a game that is designed to have that feeling by not nailing down every single aspect and letting individuals have their individual artistic freedom. I mean, that surely is the way to go about it. The fact that they're putting stuff in that's kind of surprising the other, or creating something where the other hadn't thought about it. And, you know, it could have gone the other way. It could have just become really messy and confusing. There's a level of mess and confusion, but it's not beyond the comprehension or anything that messes the game up too much, if you see what I mean. It's just right. Well, I'm learning it's just right. It was potentially on the other side of the fence of just right before I started doing the director's commentary, because I'm not particularly good at theorising what's going on and understanding a lot of metaphors. But I'm learning.
What's fascinating to me, Dan, is that you're an atheist, but each of the 3 games that we've made are so strongly about religion, either the language or taking allegories and stories. Why are you so drawn to it?
I think I'm really interested in people and the stories that make up people. And I think there is like in the Bible, like most kind of religious texts, it's not about what it is, it's about what is behind what it is, and that's what you're really getting to, is the idea of the sort of the parable or the metaphor. And it really felt like, particularly with Paul on the road to Damascus, is a story that many, many, many people know and we can understand, and it's about redemption and consequence and guilt and transformation and who you really are and what that means. And it felt like just a really strong, powerful way of making it very accessible, the narrator's kind of inner turmoil, in a kind of a story that we know really well. And there's a universality to those kind of questions that, you know, whether it's, you know, Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's kind of Buddhism, that they're asking very broadly similar questions. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a good person? How should we behave to each other? How should we feel about the world we're in? And it's a really powerful way of speaking to a lot of people. I think that's always been really important as well, is that it's about saying, no matter who you are or what your kind of like outlook on life is, whether that's, you know, faith-based or secular, that we are all effectively asking the same questions. And that's why I think all our games kind of tend to be around those questions.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts. I'm not religious, but a lot of religion is incredibly interesting. And the themes that religion brings up are themes that somebody who's not religious could also ponder and get involved in.
Is Dear Esther a depressing game or a hopeful game?
For me, it's kind of like a mix of both, really. I think, like, my interpretation is kind of like, always feel like kind of depressed when I think about the kind of turmoil that this guy's been going through for God knows how long, and the kind of environment he's been in, and, you know, all these events surrounding his story. But for me, I always feel like a little bit hopeful at the end. You know, like the conclusion just feels like a relief, and like this is kind of all ended in some way. What do you think, Jess?
I think it's a game about acceptance, and I really like that. And I think it's telling that a lot of people with mental health issues have responded really positively to the game, and we get a lot of emails and letters from those people saying that it's helped them through a really difficult time. And for me, that's because it's about the struggle of being human, that it's hard and that we love and that we grieve and we lose, but we come through it. And those things are what makes us human, that it's transformative and that the pain is part of life. And that's a really beautiful message. And I think that's what you do so well, Dan. That's what you write about. You write about what it is to be human. So, Dan, you wrote it.
Without wanting to cop out, one of the things about writing it that I really wanted to do was to make something that people could take and could own, and it would be their take on it, and their interpretation of it mattered in a way that mine didn't. My job was to give them the architecture to interpret in their way. So
I think that is a cop-out. I do. I think as a writer you always have.
Yeah, I think it's redemptive. But I don't think the redemption is as cut and dried as it's all okay at the end. It's not okay at the end. But there is a release, there's an escape, that bad times will happen, but they will end. And they won't always end positively, but they will end. And that's I think, the redemption of it, of saying that
this
things are never easy.
This too shall pass.
This too shall pass,
which my mum always says, you know, and I think that's probably the motto of the Chinese room,
yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
isn't it?
Like, I don't think it's as kind of openly positive as, say, Rapture had a much more strongly positive end. I don't think Esther has. I think it's much greyer than that. But I think fundamentally it's about coming to terms.
I'd say I'm on the side of it's a depressing game because of that ending, regardless of whether you're coming to terms or accepting it, because it's a sad ending, as we're about to find out. But I do understand, I do appreciate the sentiment behind it. Reminds me a bit of Birdman, if anyone's ever seen that movie. It's quite a similar ending, actually. And similar character, but definitely in a similar mental state as this character we see here.
So, Dear Esther is the first walking simulator. How do you feel about Walking Simulator?
You know what, I think I took offence to it when it first became a thing, but I think actually I don't mind it so much now. I think the fact that we have kind of taken ownership over it, like that genre has been kind of made our own by not just our game, but like a bunch of different games have kind of embraced it. I don't know, what do you guys think?
I'm still really confused about the need to categorise in games, probably more than any other creative industry, and I think it shows that games have a long way to come in terms of how we describe an experience. So I do agree with Rob that it's really positive that we reclaimed Walking Simulator, but I still find it reductive, possibly, as a term. What about you, Dan?
I think for me, it's people want to know what they're buying and what they're getting into, and I think it's so people understand what a walking simulator is now, in a way that if it was like first-person adventure or slow-moving, not very interactive story,
something you like or you don't like,
very fluffy. But I think if you buy a game and someone says it's a walking simulator now, you've got a pretty good idea what you're getting. And there's Gone Home, Firewatch, Stanley Parable. There's so many other really good titles that kind of fall within that group of games out there now, that it does have an identity. And I think that's the really good thing about it. When Esther came out, there was literally nothing. We had no idea how we described it or what we called it.
We actually struggled with that quite a lot.
And sort of ended up being sort of like a ghost story, because it felt like it was the closest thing we could get. But it feels like now you can make a game like this and you can say it's a walking simulator, and people will know what it is straight away.
I think that's the nice thing is there's a whole group of games out there now that quite comfortably put themselves into that category. And so it's like, if we were to come out before and just said it's a walking simulator, people would have been like, well, that sounds terribly boring. That doesn't. Why the hell would I play that? But now people.
I think these games are terribly boring to a lot of people.
Yeah, now people are kind of familiar with what that means. The people out there who actually seek this sort of stuff out, and it's kind of
not me.
Really cool. I mean, me myself, I would actually do that, use that as a term to search. But yeah, I mean, it's a very simplified term for what our game is, and there's obviously a lot more to it than walking. But I think when you look at other genres, they're also kind of very simplified. First-person shooter, role-playing game. It's to me it doesn't seem as bad as any of those other things.
Or it's equally as bad. Yeah, it's just a name. It is walking. Maybe you're simulating walking to a degree.
There's a bit of an illusion of simplicity with games like Dear Esther that people kind of assume, because there's not a lot of mechanics and there's not much going on in that sense, that they're easy to make. And I think actually it's kind of the opposite in a way, that because they're so simple, everything is exposed and everything has to be exceptionally good for it to work, because you're carrying a player's experience on a fairly sparse, minimal kind of framework, and that really means that every aspect of it has to be produced at a really high quality and has to be done with a lot of passion and a lot of thought. There's nowhere to hide in a game like Esther, and that's something which I think carries through to the best games of this type. You can see with all of them there's a real commitment to kind of depth and a really intelligent way of approaching design, and a real kind of trust in the player and a real assumption that players are smart, imaginative people who want experiences. It's not a game that it's easy to just knock off or to do with any kind of lazy attitude. You have to be really, really passionate and care a great deal and put a lot of thought into it.
Because nothing else would carry it. There's no action as such. It's relying on the aspects that I find the most interesting in video games: storyline, script, character development. You know, it's like watching a movie that's like just got two people in it and based in a house. Actually, there is a movie like that I watched during COVID with Zendaya in. What the heck's it called? I'm not going to remember. But it's so simple. But because the acting and the script and the storyline are so good, it's brilliant. And the budget must have been, I mean, whatever you have to pay those guys, right? Because there's no CGI, there's no stunts, there's no shooting on location. So to make a film like that work, you've got to really put the effort into the elements that you can manipulate or enhance, or however you want to look at it. And I find that impressive. Is that somebody standing over there?
One of the things that I think was added more frequently in the final version of Dear Esther was the inclusion of a number of ghosts in the game. These are not like ghosts that you'd see in a normal horror game. They're just very loose silhouettes that you'll see around the island, usually like quite a distance off, or just kind of somewhere that you'd barely see it out the corner of your eye. I think this is a good example of where it's kind of really in your face, and these are kind of just something that we put in to kind of not just bring some unreal elements to the island, but something supernatural as well, something that's kind of beyond this world, something kind of unsettling. And yeah, we've a lot of effort's been put in to make these things very subtle. I didn't really want them to be like, I didn't want it to be a ghost story, so to speak, but I just kind of wanted to bring some of this supernatural element into the game, and this area is probably one of the most prominent, because you can see it just before you go down into the gully here, and I think it's really one of my favorite scenes, just because of it being so spooky, so unreal, and so interesting.
I don't know if I like it that much. They might have just been trying to do a bit too much there. What's the point? I get the supernatural element and that, but is that just for the sake of it? Trying to think if I saw that figure the first time around. I might have, and then I didn't think about it again because it obviously disappears by the time you get here.
The point about this to me is that it's probably the voiceover in the game that kind of sums up the whole story and the experience. It's almost like a recap of everything that's gone before you start the final climb. And you know it's that pause before you're going to start the final climb and before the game's kind of builds to a climax. But you can also see the whole level, and it's like the idea that you are standing looking down on your own journey, a bit like the idea of your life flashing before your eyes, or sort of like seeing your body but having an out-of-body experience at the moment of death. And it was really designed to try and get that feeling as the player that you stop and you take stock of everything, and there's a bit of a sense of there's no going back. You take a breath and now it finishes. And I really wanted to kind of achieve that sort of sense. And I think we did. I think it really came together here, that you got that sense of going, right, now this ends, and now I move forwards to it.
I think when I played it the first time, I did overlook, and thought, oh, I've come all the way up there. But because it's only this level, if you could see where you first started, and a bit of sort of like the cave entrance and exit and that kind of thing, it would have given me more of a sense of, that journey. I find this music a bit creepy. I think this is where they've played with the sound a bit. Very ghostly. I wonder if they're going to talk about that here. Or they're going to talk about these weird words.
So here it kind of, the environment becomes a little bit more surreal again. We kind of play with the colours a little bit, bring up the saturation. It's kind of a little bit of a return to some of the more cave-like aesthetics in terms of colours and stuff like that. And it's kind of there to kind of signpost another significant moment in the game, or something that's leading up to the significant moment. It goes back to this kind of idea of having these emotional signposts in the visuals of the game, without it being overly obvious. And some of that emotional stuff comes through the colours of the environment, and the more saturated they are, the more kind of surreal things become. So this is kind of like a turning point in the game. It's kind of like the final notice of you reaching the end.
The music that's playing here is a repeat of another cue, and originally we hear it played on the piano, and the string quartet take on the piece here. And it's one of those really nice instances where we were in the studio and I had this idea of how it was going to sound, and I thought it was going to be quite full and rich and full-bodied, and then one of the string players said to me, this is wrong actually for what we're playing, and they said, let's strip out all the vibrato, let's play it in a really Scottish plain style. And it absolutely transformed that piece, and it's one of the really special things about being a composer, is that you get to collaborate with people who come fresh to it. So you have this preconceived idea of how it should be, and then they say, no, why don't we turn it around and think about it like this? And it absolutely fits and works for that scene, because what we're getting at this point is a sense of fragility, of an ending, and it's almost reminiscent of a funeral procession. It's slow and it's dirge-like.
It's very bleak again.
It was just a lovely moment where they gave something of themselves, and that's what's amazing about working with live instrumentalists. You're never going to get that from a sample.
Yeah, dirge, a funeral march. Now she said it.
It was possible that this last section of the game could have felt quite laborious and forced, because it's two long zigzagging paths that just go up, and there was a real importance to getting it right. Quite a lot of work went into it. I think at this point for me, you probably as a player understand that the narrator's going to die at the end, and that this is it. And that unlike where the rest of the island, there's this sense of this could just keep going on forever and ever and ever, and you're going to keep the motif of come back. But I think when you set on this path, we really wanted to have that sense of, this is it, this is the last time you're going to walk these paths, this will end now. And that sort of idea of going, you're kind of climbing towards your death, but you're also moving towards a point where that glimpse in the caves where you see the motorway, and you go, I understand what this is about. For me, the whole path up the side of the mountain is about saying, it's okay. It's that kind of starting to kind of release it and go, it's kind of okay that Esther died, it's kind of okay that the accident happened. I know that I'm going to die. I know that this is going to end. And I know that there's nowhere for me to go apart from follow this path, but that's all right. And it was very sort of hard to kind of try and find that subtle mix between the dread of it and the acceptance. It's where the positive and the negative and the kind of the loss and the redemption really start colliding for me. At least certainly that was what we were trying to achieve with it.
I think they did a good job. It has got that sense about it, but it's not overwhelming. It's almost an inevitability.
With the climb being quite a poignant moment of the game overall and of the story, it was quite a difficult task to try and make that climb still interesting and not too laborious, because it's kind of this zigzag up there with nothing really. There's no real environment. You just kind of have the sea on one side and the cliff face on the other. So there was quite a lot of work that went into kind of building up this feeling of tension as you're rising and kind of making this moment as poignant as possible while still making it interesting.
It's the wind.
So a lot of effort was put into building up this weather, building up the winds and the swaying of the grass and kind of the volume of the soundscapes and everything mixing together with the music and just kind of visually really trying to make this a tense moment. And I think it's hopefully been pulled off all right. And you'll notice when you get to the top, this kind of tension dies, and that's very purposeful. You'll see no more wind. It's just kind of like a symbolic thing where you're coming to the last moment, the point of no return, and that's been very deliberately designed that way.
Yeah, I think once you get to that point, it's like it truly is that inevitability then. You don't need to worry anymore. It's beyond the point of no return, isn't it? It's happened. Even before it has actually happened. So where does the weather die? Oh.
We had a lot of debates, didn't we, about the ending of the game and whether the player should retain control or whether it was okay to go to a cutscene at this point. I personally don't mind it. I actually actively like it because I think it works really well as a metaphor for loss of control at that point. Dan, I know you're not as keen.
Yeah, I'm not. I would have loved the player not to have had control taken away from them, but to me it was a balance between two evils. The evil of having a cutscene and the evil of the player accidentally falling off the ladder halfway up and destroying the ending.
Yeah, I agree. Like I think we tried a few different things, and the tech at the time just wasn't, the ladder tech at the time just wasn't there. So, and the other thing for me was pacing. It was making sure all the music, the voiceovers, the timings and everything were perfect for that final jump off point. And just letting the players kind of noodle around going up a ladder for what may have been like 7 minutes because it's a tall tower was kind of an impossible task.
One of the things that I enjoyed the most on working on Dear Esther was Rob's beautiful visuals were so inspiring, but Dan's words are always so amazing to write to. I think that's where we start as a partnership. And the music at the end was so easy to write because that last voiceover, it's the pinnacle of the writing to me, as it should be, because it's the last VO, so you would have failed if it wasn't good, but it is just so beautiful and moving. And for me, talking about whether it's a hopeful ending, the music is really hopeful at this point. And it signifies to me transformation, freedom, escape, acceptance. Yeah, and it was just a beautiful cue to write, actually.
I don't know, I can't remember quite where it came from in the mod, but the moment when we went, or we could put the bird in there, and you could see the bird's shadow, and actually it turned from being kind of like a straightforward literal suicide into a metaphorical, or to my mind, kind of like, I always really believed the narrator did turn into a bird just before they hit the ground, and that was really important. I think it's probably the strongest ending in any of our games so far. But yeah, I'm very proud of the way everything came together in that last section.
Yeah, I think it's the bird thing is particularly interesting because I think it was in the original mod, but the timings and everything were just all off, and you never really saw the seagull Yeah, at least the shadow as well. It was all kind of like a little bit broken. And I remember when we went back in, I made a real effort to try and get that shadow just out of the center of the view. So you kind of have this hint of something happening, and I think you can hear the sound of a seagull flapping its wings. It's like very subtle, but like I say, I kind of really like the way that came together. It kind of, it's very, like say, it's kind of like a release, but at the same time, there's still this kind of ambiguity there. It's kind of beautiful.
And I'm really proud that I got the monitor in at the end for an ending of, it goes into the hospital monitor, signifying the flat line. And I think it's it's one of those moments where you never want to be so clever that people notice it and it takes them out of the moment, but it just flows in through the music, and it just feels like everything comes together at that last point. That last VO, Rob's amazing visuals and the music, and it feels like a really, really strong and beautiful ending.
And then in the last second, Nigel Carrington's delivery of just those two words have come back, where he just pitch perfect.
Yeah. So that's the end of the director's commentary. We'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone for listening. We hope you've uncovered some secrets and some facts that you didn't know about the game before.
We'd also like to say a huge thank you for buying the game, and for all our fans who've been behind us and been behind the game and have kept it alive all these years. It's a real privilege that it's still out there, still such a title that people love so much.
Yeah, and we're really looking forward to the future and what we can create coming up next. Thanks for listening.
Cheers.
Bye.
That was really good. Dan, Jess, Adam Stewart. Well, I really enjoyed that. I didn't think I would. I thought it might be a bit of a chore. But I thought I'd give it a go anyway, and it's made it so much more poignant. I feel sad for people who missed out on things when they played it, because they didn't get the full experience. And the full experience is actually a really well thought out, a really immersive, artistic story. Yeah. Well, I think possibly OBS has... I think I did this last time. OBS froze. I don't know whether this is showing credits to you guys or not, but it ended. So there's possibly something in there that they didn't want people to see right at the end. I don't know. It's bizarre that it did that last time I was playing. That's it. Well, look, we'll leave with some of the final music, and I will just say thank you so much for watching. This will be uploaded to my YouTube channel with the other parts, so please give me a sub on there, follow on here if you haven't already, and yeah, up next, well, have to wait and see, but it'll be another first playthrough. But for now, thanks again, and until next time.